Well, I've been pretty busy lately, but I have done a few things and I just wanted to show you guys what I've been up to. I needed a workbench for this area where we do a lot of the videoing, and I needed a shelf and a cabinet to put all my brewing equipment in, and I really went all out. Took strap hinges and made a area below for the tools, and I used strap hinges on the top, did barn door look for the top, and made a huge area for my brewing equipment. And I roll out the bottom. It's a big workbench. It rolls around on big heavy casters, so it's a really useful thing. And I went all out. As you know, I'm proud of my heritage and my faith, so I wrote on there everything in the whole family history and everything to do with my faith in God and how the Silvas came about. We're the Levite bloodline, and I just enjoy that family heritage, and I wanted to put it someplace where I could see what we come from. So to some, it may look like a prisoner that had too much time in the cell and was carving on walls, but to me, it's a treasure of my heart to my family. So I'll show you what I built here and what I wood burned into the side of the cabinet doors, just as a teaching tool and a memory tool of my family. Alright, here's the top half, and I used basswood here, and I used chestnut wood for the rails, and also I glued it and nailed it together. I had the strap hinges, and I built two nice shelves over here for brewing, layering the brewing equipment that I need while I brew, the sparge tank and the brew tank and the mash tun, all the stuff I use. So I just made a huge area, and I can fit it all in there, but it worked great. And I put some nice trim that I had laying around. Here, I'll show you a closer view. Alright, here's the bottom base. And like I said, you can roll that thing anywhere you want in the whole shop area. And I'll give you a close-up view, but here I made this huge door, and I can fit all my tools down here that I need, like for the day-to-day woodworking and things like that I do in this little area to show projects and things that we're doing. So let's take a closer look. And you can see I made it pretty beefy. I have 4x4s inside and the rollers, casters underneath there, right below the 4x4 supports of this workbench. And I went around the outside with old chestnut oak. You can see the close grain in that wood in comparison to the chestnut here. So it's all old on the outside except for the pine and spruce that I used. I just mitered it and gave it that effect. Put the strap hinges right on there. But see, this top is laminated 2x4s cut down to 3 inches, and I just glued them and attached them together as a solid top. And if you look underneath it, I took a solid piece of plywood for the bottom, around it, nice edge there, and I went and made posts and really supported this thing solid in here, so we had a nice secure workbench. And underneath is really tightly secured with extra support, so it isn't going anywhere. It's totally solid. And to get to the top here, like I said, I used that chestnut. That was really nice wood. Now, you guys want to see all the whole family history and my faith all in one. It's right on there. And it's a lot to go through, but I'll lead you from the beginning here. So I just started out with the simple Old Testament Genesis records. In Jehovah, God created Adam, and the years they lived, 930 years he lived, and his son Seth, Enos, and all throughout Enoch, which ascended to heaven 365 years. Also all the way to Noah, and I gave the date and the covenant that God gave to Noah through the blood and the example of blood, and he gave it to his 3 sons. So that was around 1656 years till the flood. So Noah had the 3 sons, Ham, Japheth, and Shem. And Shem's the descendants of the Israelites. So that's that family. So I just kept going from Shem's, but I came up above just to give an idea of what came from Ham's family, Amorites, Jebusites, Hittites, and where they came from, Canaan, and what son of Ham's the Egyptians came from, and the Philistines came from them, and just went through the whole past, and where the Israelites came from, where the Ethiopians, everything there. So I gave a good idea just by writing it on the board, and I went through the ages of Shem's family up through, and up to Terah, Abraham's father. And I showed Lot's 2 daughters and the 2 groups of people that came from them, the Moabites and Ammonites. And I showed Abraham, and I showed the importance of the priest, Melchizedek, the high priest, and how he blessed Abraham, and Abraham got the blessing, and the same place of the altar in coordinates with Jacob's pillar where the first temple was built. So I showed there's a covenant with Abraham and his family where God said his seed will be blessed. And that's where Christ came from, and that's where he named his altar Jehovah Jireh. So Melchizedek was the high priest and king of Salem, and considered that at the time, and then he blessed Abraham. So then I show Isaac and Ishmael, and the 12 princes that came from Ishmael, and the one son of Abraham, Midianites came from him, and the whole groups of people that you read about in the Bible. So Isaac had Jacob and Esau, and I showed the Edomites came from Esau, and Jacob had the 12 sons, and he's the one that set the pillar up and had a blessing from God and said this is where the temple will be built. So this is where it is today, and it's believed the same place as Abraham also, where he built his altar. And I just went through all the tribes. There's Levi at the top, that's my family. And I showed some of what the tribes scattered throughout Europe are believed to be, and the names that came from the tribe of Dan, Danara, Darda, Dara, all these names and the places where they're thought to be by the historians and the Josephus, believing that part of the Israelites were definitely in Crete and Troy area. The lost tribes is what I'm saying here. So I have all these 12 sons and their symbols, the family crests that you see in Europe today, and all the family symbols. And Ephraim and Manasseh, the 2 sons of Joseph, which came from Jacob's 12 sons, and the one had the main blessing, and this is a heavier vine and the other one's a smaller vine. But the people that are believed to have come from that through European history and beliefs is this people right here, the Markandians, in the east of the Caspian Sea, where they were meant to show like American. This is where the name came from. So, I mean, it's a little bit of history that's sketchy, but yet shows a little idea of what could have happened to the Israelites when they were scattered. So this is a brief history at the top. And I go the 430 years in Egypt, and it started in 1876 BC. And when they left, 1446 BC. And the Aaron's Levitical priesthood. And here I show the 4 sons that came from Levi. And Aaron would have been a descendant. And his priesthood of the Levites came at the time of Moses. And this was the new priesthood for God after Melchizedek. And this is through Abraham's family until Christ comes as the final high priest. So what I'm showing is they had the Ark of the Covenant. And that was, the way they communicate with God through the priests of the Levites. 300 years of judges, and then they built the first temple with Solomon in 966 BC. So we're moving on up to Christ coming, and before Christ BC, AD after his death. So we're showing how the world actually made history around the Israelite beliefs and Christ. So first you have Judah's conflicts with northern Israel, and the Levites joined Judah. So that's how the Levites were with Judah in Israel at the time of the later years that I'm showing here. In 586 BC, the Babylonians, they fell to the Babylonians, and the first temple fell. So then later I show the rule of the Persians and the second temple being built. And Alexander the Great comes in 322 BC and under Macedonia. So the things that Daniel prophesied. So as we're going, we're making the book of the prophets. All these prophets are coming. Some of these are from the New Testament, but I listed them in alphabetical order. So you can see, like Elijah and all these prophets spoke of Christ and his coming as the Israelite people were living. And here I'll just show you the things that came of God's covenants and how he ruled his people. As Moses and the Passover was a symbolic event, and the 10 Commandments, and then they had the covenant codes and the book of the law and the holiness codes. So if you just want to organize everything that God gave for us to do and to follow his priesthood before Christ came. So the Levites were in charge, which that's why I have this all on here. Here I showed the exiles of the later Israelites. It's a little out of the order per se. But this is what's said to be, the later BC time towards Christ, of where these lost Israelite tribes were going to, what their names were, and where they could have been part of the Europeans through certain historic writings. So I'm showing like the Anglo-Saxons have the Scythian name and the Assia and Angli and all these things, like the Gothics are supposedly of the Israelite nations. So that's why a lot of the European flags and things, you always see these symbols of the Israelites and the Judah leading everything. Like I'll show you here, Judah the son of Jacob, and every king was supposed to come from Judah. That was part of the blessing of Judah. And Yeshua Christ, of course, is the final King of Kings. David, Solomon, Yehuda had 5 sons, and they were around Solomon's day, and they supposedly spread to these people. So they were the wise men. And this hand, you'll see, was a symbol in the European flags, one of the European flags. So it's a belief that it's part of their heritage, perhaps. That's why they put it on the flag. It's a symbol of the ribbon on the hand. You ever hear the story of the one that was born with the ribbon tied to his hand with the other son that came out? And I'm just showing you everything here. Like, all these symbols have to do with blessings of the 12 sons. So, like, some of them have to do with, like, Levi and Simeon had some things they done wrong in the beginning there, and God said, Simeon will live by the sword and Levi will be scattered, but they also had a priesthood of Levi. So Levi's family was to be scattered through the world, and every one of them had their own type of blessing and things said about them through Jacob before he died. So what I've done is showed, the whole way in the history of the Israelites and the tribes of Judah. And I listed, after Moses, they're led by Joshua. Here's all the judges in order that they were led by. And then from the judges, they had kings. And I'll show you here the kings, Saul, David, Solomon. And then they split. And that's what I showed in the dates. Israel and Judah split, the tribe of Judah and the rest of Israel. And here's their kings listed in order. So it's just a reference for me, and then I went and showed the kings, and then there's a Christ that came after the Roman rule in 63 BC. So the Romans took over, and he's now the new temple because he tore down the old and it was destroyed after Christ here. And his name being Yeshua, and changed to Jesus in English, and it's a new covenant in his blood. So all the old covenant is gone, so now it's through Christ, and he's the final high priest that allows us to come to the Father through him. And it's not the Levites anymore, but it's through God, it's through Christ. And he's a King of Kings, King of Salem. End of the second temple, and AD begins. So then I go all the way up here again, and I'm just showing, hey, here's the 12 disciples. It's a good reference. Hey, is this guy the disciple, or was he just an apostle? Like Mark and Luke were the apostles and not the disciples. You'd think the Gospels were all the apostles, but they're not. And there's like 70 apostles listed after these first 12 disciples. And I have them all listed here in what was named in the Bible. I don't have all 70, just the ones in the Bible. And it gives me a good reference. I show who's with Stephen, who's with Peter in Rome, and who went with Cornelius. So that shows that. And so they're run by Rome, and the Levites are there, and that's where my family's at, in Israel at the time, led by Rome. So they exiled the Israelites in Zupich, Germany, which was Rome at the time, is where my family went to, and it was a Jewish town, started in like 496 AD, and later changed to Germany as the Roman Empire fell. But that was the sign of that town right there. And the first in my family known that I know, without going over to Palestine or Zülpich, Germany, to find out would be Joseph Nathan Levi, which he carries the Levi name. And they have all done that. That's a heritage thing of the Jews to keep the Levi on the last part of the name. And his son, which is Ben, is Abraham Samuel. So back then at that time, the thing to do was you name your firstborn son after their grandfather. So you skip every other generation and you keep the first name. And then you also, if you're a Jew, you keep your Levi name on your end. So the next one was Rabbi Aaron Samuel Zilch. And this is when they started mandating that the Jews would have a last surname. So Zilch was a name, and they gave a lot of derogatory names, like it was Yiddish for like zero. So Zilch they kept with the first one, Rabbi Aaron Samuel Zilch. So the next generation, the firstborn son in my line was Abraham. And this is like 1725 AD. And he had all these names because your surname was spelled differently as long as it sounded the same, you're allowed to spell it, basically different. And in the beginning of these surnames, they were actually changing them. So it went from Zilich to Zilch and all these things here. And then my grandfather that moved over to America, he was born in 1751. He used all these names. And it's just amazing how the spellings change. So David Silks would have been the one that moved over. He was a Hessian soldier. And he was, out of the regiments, enlisted from Hesse Castle under this General Fonsen, if I pronounced it right. But he came over here. And he was on a Triton ship. He was actually captured after the ship's been through a hurricane and they were heading up the coastline in Virginia. He was brought to the Philadelphia Gold Prison. And he actually was given an opportunity to desert his place as a Hessian and get the 50 acres and live as a U.S. land grant. And it's good that they did because the Jewish people were, criticized in Germany later on in the 1800s. So, it was a good move. So, he moved to Buffalo, Perry County, and I have all the records of that. And he actually accumulated like over 400 acres, and he had 2 sawmills, just from starting out with the 50 acres. So he was a hard worker. And his firstborn son was Abraham, and he used the name Zilich too. And that was his firstborn. But my family comes from John Silks. This is around the Battle of 1812, and they were in that also. And he had 5 sons, and they all fought in the Civil War. And all the first 4 served in the Civil War, which is my family. George is from my line, and they all fought in the 77th Division for Pennsylvania, and it was wiped out, and they actually all survived the whole division being wiped out. And that was a huge deal to have the whole family survive, and all 4 of them. So even Abraham was in the names at that point too, but it wasn't a followed trait where you had to do it every other generation anymore. Then I have my relatives, William Henry Silks. That's the guy you see on the picture on my heads of everything. He was a logger, same with the generations before, and he moved to where I'm from. George O. Silks Sr. was a logger, my great-grandfather. My grandfather was a logger also, and he was a junior, George O. Jr., railroad man and World War II vet. And my father, Chester Silks, carpenter trapper, 2 sons, my brother and I. And I just named my sons, and my one son's of a Navajo descent from another line, Corey Boyer, and Hunter, and Brandon Jacob Silks. So, a lot of history there. And it just shows the beginning and the cutoff of the records from the 4 sons of Levi, and just the history to show where they got to and where the rest of the Israelites got to and where my faith came from. So if you're wondering, where I came about being a Christian, it's in the blood. So it's all there. Well, I hope you enjoyed, my project, and I just thought I'd share it with you, share a little family history, and it's good to know where you come from, because that's how you know where you go. You need to know where you start. And I made it a little fancier. Thought I'd enjoy what I have here and enjoy making it. So until next time, take care.